What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh. This is Overlanding Now, and today what we're going to talk about is lifted Jeeps. But not just lifted Jeeps. More importantly, if a lift is something that every Overlander needs. I'm going to answer those questions and a couple more that I have written down that I want to talk about to get everybody's input. Also, we're going to be talking about lifts for my rig at the end of this video because I have a couple of options that I'm looking at and I'd love to get everybody's input, so stay tuned.
I've been running with lightning feet. Nah, 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 nah. Hear that thunderbolt following me. Nah, 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 nah. Baby got wild on these same streets. Nah, 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 nah. But I'm still running, nobody catch me. Nah, 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 nah. Yeah, move with it. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Move with it, move with it. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Move with it, move with it. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Move with it, move with it. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Move with it, move with it.
Now, if you take a look at Instagram, you take a look at YouTube, it seems like everybody in the overland community has this sweet lifted rig. And what I want to discuss is if that's something that's absolutely necessary for every single Overlander. Because I know with our rig and our Jeep, we have taken that thing to the ends of the earth. We have gone on some extremely difficult trails, and then we've done some pretty regular, just everyday overlanding forest roads, long straight runs in the desert. Nothing that required you to have any type of crazy lift on your vehicle. Now, I know that it looks a lot freaking cooler, so that's a plus, but it also costs a lot to have your rig lifted. And if you're not involved in crazy rock crawling and all of these other things that come along with overlanding, then the question I have is it absolutely necessary for you to have a lift on your rig? And the reason I ask that is because I've seen every single rig that I pass on the road or I see on the trail, they always have this big crazy lift. And when we bought our Jeep, a lift was not top of the priority list. And the reason it's not top of the priority list is because these vehicles are extremely capable right off the factory in the showroom floor. So is it necessary for you to go spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 on new rims and tires and a lift and then have somebody install it? Or is it perfectly capable just the way it is? So I'd love to know all of your guys' ideas and your guys' comments and input on that question, because I think a lot of people come into this not really understanding how expensive that this hobby is in general, because all of the components outside of the lift, the tent, the racks, the roto packs, all of the different things that you need, that stuff adds up. So when somebody walks into this, you have a little bit of apprehension because it does seem to cost so much money. So the question that I have is, what is overlanding to you? And that would really answer if you need a lift or if it's something that you think you and your family should invest the money into. Now, I know overlanding for us is more on the lines of mild rock crawling, depending upon what situation we put ourselves into, because a lot of the times we find ourselves on a trail and before you know it, you're like, oh man, this is a lot more serious than I thought it was going to be. It said easy, it said moderate or whatever. And those trail rating systems that you'll find on like trailsoffroad.com and different trail rating systems, it's all open for interpretation. So if you see an easy or a moderate trail, that trail may be a little bit harder for somebody who's not as experienced. So what is overlanding to you? Is overlanding rock crawling? Is overlanding camping on BLM land? Is overlanding just taking off on forest roads and exploring forest roads? Because I'll tell you, most of the forest roads that I've been on are not extremely difficult or extremely technical whatsoever. And I know, because I've been there in our Jeep without a lift, that you can get to these places and you can go just about anywhere you want to go without having a lift on your rig. Now, the reason we haven't lifted our rig yet is simply because it's a cost thing. Do I want to spend money here? Do I want to spend money there? And that's what everybody has to look at. If money is no object, then buy your vehicle, take it directly to whoever lifts your stuff, have it lifted, put your wheels and tires on it, completely outfit it, and go hit the trail. I mean, that's the best possible outcome. But for the rest of the world that lives in like this real world scenario, you have to kind of prioritize what's important. Now, our Jeep, the biggest problem that I have with our Jeep when we are packed out and when we're loaded out and we're taking off across the country is suspension sag. Now, the suspension sag on our rig is pretty bad once we're completely loaded out. When we have the refrigerator, we have all of our gear, 3 people in the car, a tent on top, our extra water, our extra gas, all of our food, our suspension sag is pretty serious. So that right there already makes the vehicle a little bit unstable. Now, as opposed to us getting a lift, we did go ahead and put 35s on the Jeep prior to having it lifted. We got new wheels and tires and we put 35s on it. That gave us a little bit of additional ground clearance, but the reality is it's nowhere near what you're going to obtain when you put a 2, 3, or 4-inch lift on your rig. The next question I have is, what is your skill level? I know for us, I feel extremely comfortable getting out into the unknown, being on a random forest road, waking up that day and saying, you know what? Let's try going this place as opposed to that place. Knowing that we could encounter some pretty serious terrain, and I feel confident in my ability to get us through that. Now, if your skill level is you don't feel comfortable doing that, you like to make a plan, stick to a plan, and then you execute that plan, and you base that upon terrain being easy or moderate, well, then that's going to make a big difference in what you need to do to your rig to feel comfortable. Because for us, we don't need a lift. Our Jeep has taken us wherever we needed to go. We've had no issues with it whatsoever. So I would say, A, get to know your rig so you understand how it performs, but also know your skill level and know what you're capable of accomplishing. Don't just go out there and hit the hardest trails and expect nothing to happen, because I promise you, you will get stuck. The hardest trail we've been on so far was Lockhart Basin in Moab, and it took us about 8 hours to go 1.5 miles. And that was just because it was extremely technical. We were loaded out, and that was the only place that I've ever gotten stuck. If I wasn't with somebody else in that moment, I don't know how I would have gotten unstuck, because there was really nothing to winch to. Luckily, we were with another vehicle and we were able to winch to that other vehicle and we were able to get out. So knowing your skill level is probably the biggest deciding point on if you need a lift, because if you're an extremely skilled off-roader or you feel very comfortable behind the wheel of your rig, then there's really no point for you to put a lift on it immediately. Now, if you want to start progressing and continue to get into more and more technical stuff, and that is your thing, and you're like an off-road guy, then yeah, I think a lift is important. I don't just hop in my Jeep and go down to the local off-road park or go find trails to hit. I like going somewhere or traveling for an experience and to get to a destination. I'm not just gonna take my Jeep and go wheeling. I'm not a wheeler. I like to overland. I like to see new places. I like to see the mountain peaks. I like to see the valleys. So that's what we do, and we know our skill level. So we know there's gonna be very few circumstances that we're gonna put ourselves into that we can't get ourselves out of. The third question I have is, what's your plan? Okay? What is the plan that you have for your trip? And the fourth question would be, how did you plan your trip? How did you plan your route? Did you plan your route using like Gaia GPS and you're using the Forest Road system? Or did you plan your route using a website like Trails Off Road, where Trails Off Road kind of gives you a breakdown of all the trails in an area that they have, and then they give a trail rating? And if you did it that way, then you're going to have a little bit more information on if it's difficult or moderate or easy. If you're using the Forest Road systems, you know that a typical forest road, maybe you don't know. Maybe I should say this. A typical forest road is typically graded, and it's maintained to an extent. They're not, by no means are they pavement roads, but they're not like stuff you're going to find in Moab where you have to rock crawl to get to the top. So that's something that you need to know, is how are you planning your trip? are you planning your trip to be more scenic? And that's really how you can avoid getting yourself in situations that you may not be able to get yourself out of. And then the last thing I want to talk about is lifts in general. So we are looking at the TerraFlex. I believe it's a 3.5-inch suspension lift, and we're looking at the Metal Cloak 3.5-inch Game Changer, I believe it's called. Now, those two lifts are not cheap. Either way, I want to go with the Falcon 3.3 adjustable shocks. So I'm going to be getting those shocks no matter what. Regardless of the lift I go with, that's the shocks I'm going to get because they offer that adjustability. And I think if we had those adjustable shocks on our current Jeep, on the trips that we've been on, we would be able to adjust the stiffness of those shocks to kind of combat some of that suspension sag that we have. But I didn't want to get those before I got the lift, and it was just a whole thing. So what we're looking at are those two lifts. And I would love to know what other people have had experience with those two lifts or with whatever lift that you have, because I'm getting into this, we've only been doing this hardcore for about a year, so I'm learning as I go. But the important thing is I want to kind of depend on the community that's around us to give us the information that we don't know, because there's a lot of things that we don't know. So if you have any input on what lifts to get, what lifts you used, things that you have done or you wouldn't do again, all of that information is valuable. All of the comments that everybody leaves and giving a pointer or a tip, I don't just respond to those comments just to respond to those comments. It's all very valuable, and I've learned more off YouTube than I've learned anywhere else. So the question is still, is a lift absolutely necessary for your overlanding rig? And I would say no. If you have a capable rig, you can get anywhere you want, knowing that you may incur some damage or you may get stuck in some spots. But that all comes down to how you planned your trip, and it also comes down to what you feel that you're comfortable doing. If you know that you can get yourself out of just about any situation and you're extremely mechanically inclined, then having a lift is probably not a big deal to you. But if you know that you need to be completely prepared, and maybe you're extremely OCD, because I'm not OCD and I just go wherever I go, then it's going to be different for you. So I would love to see everybody's feedback. I would love to know what you guys have to say. I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video today. If you like the video, like the video. If you don't like the video, don't do anything at all. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. We appreciate every single one of you. Thank you.